Hey everybody, welcome to the Off the Shelf Board Game video review channel over here on YouTube, and what you're watching here is my top 51 board games of all time. Now as we start getting higher up on lists, especially now because in this video we're going to look at numbers 11 through 20, and you're going to start seeing that a lot of my games are definitely not what anybody would ever call multiplayer solitaire. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, double checking this time so I don't get it wrong, there's actually only two total cooperative games left on my list. And you're going to see there's probably, well, there's only been a couple others on my list. So you see that I'm one of those kind of people who I enjoy games that has lots and lots of player interaction. So let's enough of the wah stuff. Let's go and get into the fun stuff and start with number 20. Number 20 on the list is Legends of Andor. Now, specifically, when we talk about Legends of Andor, I'm talking about the complete system at this point. Because to be brutally honest here, if we were just talking about the basic box of Legends of Andor, the game would not be in my top 51 games of all time. It's the expansions that fix all the problems that I have with putting it so high on the list, because it's the expansions that add so much to the variety, so much replay, and just the potential amount of fun you can have with Legends of Andor. Now, what is Legends of Andor, and why did it bump Mage Knight down on the list? That's an interesting thing, and again, it's all because of the expansions. Now, I've talked about it earlier when you're talking about board games. Sometimes games can be too complex for their own good, and that's good. I enjoy complexity, but sometimes you get to the point where the game is so obtuse, so complex, that you're taking away the basic essence of the game, you're taking away the fun of the game. Legends of Andor doesn't do that. This is an extremely easy game to teach. You basically do two things in your turn. You basically have a certain amount of time that's judged by these discs, and you watch this time track across the top. Spend too much time, you start taking stamina damage. But the basic idea is you spend time to do things such as move around the board, or you spend time to interact with bad guys and do various things. It's really that simple. You don't have a lot of decisions in that aspect, because you really are basically only have two options on your turn. And you may go, wow, that's overly simplistic. How can this be a fun game? Well, it's a fun game because it's an adventure game that unfolds so fantastically every single time you play it. Again, gotta emphasize I'm talking about the expansions here, because every time you play the game is going to be different. Because you're going to have these adventure cards, and you're going to randomly shuffle up a certain amount of cards to represent various stages of the adventure. And when you get to various stages of the adventure, you're going to pick one of those cards. You just don't know what that card is going to be in advance. So you may go out there exploring, adventuring, and all of a sudden you flip over a card and a mighty dragon is going to come and visit you and make your life a little bit more difficult. Or maybe a giant squid is going to enter the board and start destroying the bridges. If it destroys all the bridges, your quest is doomed. Or maybe the prince has been poisoned. You need to find a witch who's going to find a cure for the prince. All this stuff is the amount of fun that comes in Legends of Andor. And it's also really fantastic that the game does have an expansion that allows you to play up to 6 players. Now, a lot of these adventure games have a heck of a time going above 4 players. Mage Knight would be a very good example. I would probably rather watch paint dry than play Mage Knight as a 6-player game. It's not because the game is bad, it's just that the game has a lot of long, lengthy turns. And I think if you would play the game as a 6-player game, those turns would take so long, you're probably looking at about an 8-hour game. And maybe you'll probably play a little bit quicker, especially for players who understand how to play the game, but I bet a 6-player game would just really drag on. So Legends of Andor is taking an adventure game, allows you to play up to 6 players, has an extreme amount of variety and a lot of fun, and it has some really interesting mechanics. And while the game can be a little mathematical, but let's be honest, so is Mage Knight. Both of them are very mathematical games in their own respect, but I enjoy how the game works. I enjoy the amount of variety from the cards you draw, the way the adventures are going to happen, and just how you're going to have a new adventure, a new experience. Lots of fantastic expansions. And let's not forget there's one more expansion coming out very soon, making Legends of Andor number 20 a solid pick as a number 20 that does bump Mage Knight down because those things I already mentioned. Legends of Andor number 20. Number 19 on the list is Cthulhu Wars from Peterson Games, which is pretty much a lifestyle game at this point because there's absolutely gobs and gobs of stuff available for this game. And it doesn't even include the fact that they're actually about to have Onslaught number 3 go up on Kickstarter towards the end of July, which is going to add another faction, more maps, more variety, and a lot more stuff to the game, which already has tons of stuff as it is. But what is Cthulhu Wars? This is an asymmetric game for 2 to 8 players. And you may need expansions to get up that 8-player count, obviously, but the basic game itself is players control one of the great ancient old ones for the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. You have Cthulhu, you have Windwalker, you have Sathagwa, you have the weird creepy guy, well, the opener of the way, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name right now, but basically you have all these ancient creatures from the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, and they're trying to take over the planet Earth and bring it ruin and destruction completely. Now, of course, I don't have the Earth map here on the table. I actually have the map from the Onslaught 2, which adds more to fun to the game. My Earth map is actually buried at the bottom of this box, and I'm sorry, I have to be honest here with you. This box is absolutely full with stuff, and it takes me a good 30 minutes just to pull everything out, just to get to the bottom where the maps are. So I cheated just a little bit. But in Cthulhu Wars, like I said, the players are trying to take over the planet. And how do they do that? They have their cultists going out there and doing their menial work by taking over these gates. If you have your cultists on these gates, you're going to start earning victory points. So you need to hold on to these gates. These gates also have extra things such as the ability to give you power, and you need power to do everything you want to do in the game. As long as you hold on to these gates, you're going to start scoring those victory points. And as soon as somebody manages to score 30 or more victory points, the game is going to come to an end. You don't win, the game comes to an end. Because you also must manage to get all 6 of your spell books. And it's a little bit of a challenge to get them. All of our different great old ones have different ways of getting those spell books. And then not only must you have all 6 of your spell books, you still must have the most amount of victory points. If the game ends and nobody has all 6 of their spell books and somebody's managed to break the 30 victory point barrier, then Earth has managed to stave off ultimate destruction from these great old ones. Now, the awesome thing about Cthulhu Wars, besides the fact that there's just tons of stuff available for the game, is the game never, ever, ever plays the same way twice, because you have all these factions available, you have all of these maps available, you have all these extra add-ons, you have these neutral factions that you can add in to bring more variety to the game. You have these high priests which bring in more variety to the game. Cosmic terrors, multiple maps. You have maps that can take the game anywhere from a 2-player game all the way up to an 8-player game, and it's not just the Earth map. You have all of these factions, and you have these, well, let's be honest here, these miniatures look really, really awesome. But we can't even call them miniatures anymore because they're absolutely giant. I mean, this is bigger than a softball, but, oh, these don't come painted. I did that myself, by the way. But the game just plays so darn well because there is so much variety, so much replay value to the game. And like I said earlier, this is basically a lifestyle game. You can get Cthulhu Wars, and trust me, you may want to get into it slowly because there is tons of stuff available, and you don't want to basically be inundated with all the stuff because you can easily do so. But if you want to get into an asymmetric war game where it's every man for himself, there's lots of table talk, lots of double dealing, then you can't look much further than Cthulhu Wars. Now, I'm going to add one little thing to the end here. Cthulhu Wars is going to have an interesting place if I do this top 51 games of all time list next year, because Peterson Games is bringing out the Gods War this year. And Gods War and Cthulhu Wars are going to battle out to see who can keep this spot on my top 51 board games of all time. Number 18 on the list is Space Hulk from Games Workshop. Now, I've been a fan of Games Workshop games for a long, long time. If you don't believe me, look how old that box is. It's from the late 80s, early 90s. That's one of the original editions of Space Hulk itself. And then you have the more modern 4th edition, which came out a couple of years ago. But what is Space Hulk? Space Hulk is a game for 2 players that can play 3 players. That's basically how I actually play it, as a 3-player game. But Space Hulk is a game of man versus xenomorphs as they try to search these abandoned space hulks, which is where the game gets its name. But these giant space hulks are these giant derelict spaceships floating through space that these xenomorphs have managed to move into, and these space marines are doing their best to eradicate them before these space hulks, these giant derelict ships, land on a planet, and these aliens, very much taken from the alien from the movie Aliens, who want nothing more than to spread their genetic code and wipe out entire species. So in the game of Space Hulk, one player will control the aliens, and the interesting thing about these aliens is that the players don't see the aliens until they manage to enter their line of sight. See, this is much like the second movie, Aliens, where the players only see these blips moving all over the screen, and you can hear Hicks in your mind going, "Game over, man, game over," because you're going to have dozens and dozens of aliens popping up from these blips, making life difficult for our heroes here as they try to infiltrate this giant Space Hulk to defeat these aliens or manage to complete some kind of various different missions or scenarios where there happens to be to recover one of the little robots that can have more information on it, or it could be something just going out there trying to defeat the giant brood lord, the leader of all these giant xenomorphs, eradicating it and removing it from the face of the Space Hulk. See, it's a really interesting game, and yes, it does use dice-based mechanics, which Games Workshop is definitely very much known for, but it also uses a timer, and it does have a very interesting feel to it. As you play this game, it almost feels like a chess game between the players, because you have certain things such as command points and other things you can do to help mitigate the luck, but overall, it's a giant game of cat and mouse, except you never know who the cat is, you never know who the mouse is, and again, one player controls alien, and one player controls either Marines, or since a lot of these Marines come in two squads, you can have one player control one squad and the other player control the other squads, and it creates this very interesting game where you're trying to defeat these evil xenomorphs before they wipe out the human population. That's Space Hulk number 18 on my list. Number 17 on the list is Tyrants of the Underdark, basically the peanut butter and the chocolate of the board game world, because you have two very separate board game styles of games mixed together, and it really works out very, very well, and it has a pretty cool theme to go with it. See, in Tyrants of the Underdark, we're taking an area control game where players are moving across the board, trying to gain dominance over this board for victory points at the end of the game. And yes, before we go any further, these are not the miniatures that came with it. I basically took them out of a wrist set, which cost me 20 bucks. But it does make the game a heck of a lot better looking, because they basically just give you these shields. And developers, producers, if you're going to give me ugly shields, cut the cost of the game down and throw cubes in the box and just allow me to save the cost of the end game, because most of us are not going to keep using these. Anyways, let's ignore that little segue here, because you have this area control game where you're trying to gain control of these different areas, and you do that by having the most units in that certain area at the end of the game. If you have the most units, you're going to score extra victory points. So players are fighting a game of area control back and forth, trying to gain those victory points. And while you hold on to those locations, you may gain extra victory points based on where their location is in the board. The more contested areas give you more victory points. The least contested areas give you less victory points. But what's added onto this game is a deck building game that uses two resources. You have your offensive resource, which is your sword and shields, which will allow you to start attacking the other units and removing them from the board, shuffling around the board, destroying them, or even replacing them with your own units in a very interesting mechanic. Or you have your web, which represents your influence, and you're going to use your influence to buy the extra cards. And this is a secondary mechanic of the game that is really interesting as a deck building game, because they took a little bit of influence from Smash Up, because you have 4 different factions. Every time you play the game, you're only going to pick 2 of those 4 factions, and every one of those factions do play a little bit differently. You have your Elemental faction, which is a lot of combinations and makes you kind of get faction or get cards of a certain style that kind of feed off each other and make them more powerful. You have your Dark Elf faction, your Drow faction, which allows you to do a little bit more deception, allows you to work towards your inner circle and score victory points like that. You have your Demon faction, which is basically has an extra mechanic of the insane outcast, which can add a lot more variety to the game. So the game does have lots of variety. Again, the 4 factions, the way you're going to play the game, you're only going to pick 2 of them every time you play the game. So it's a really interesting game that has lots of ways to win it. You can concentrate on the area control mechanics and still win the game. You can concentrate on the deck building and still win the game, or a combination of both. And Tyrants of the Underdark is number 17 on my list because it creates an interesting game that melds 2 mechanics very well to create one really enjoyable game. Number 16 on the list is Dungeon Twister, or at least in this case, Dungeon Twister Prison, which is the second edition of the game. See, Dungeon Twister Prison, I always call it Dungeon Twister just for simplicity here, is a more modernized, at least in my mind, at least this is how it ticks my brain, a more modernized version of chess. Because in Dungeon Twister Prison, each one of the players is going to get an equal set of heroes that they're trying to go through this dungeon with. And I hate to use the term dungeon, even though it's in the title, because when you see what I'm about to explain to you, you're going to see that this is really a modernized, fantasy, pretty cool version of chess. See, each team has to have the exact same heroes on their side of the board, and your objective in the game is to score points. You can score points either by defeating another player's piece. Doesn't matter what you use to defeat it. If you defeat, you score the victory points. You can also score victory points by moving your pieces to the other side of the board. But where the game gets its title from, where it gets the dungeon twister part of the board, is the fact that all these tiles are connected to each other. If you're on one of these tiles, such as if you're on tile number 38, you can rotate this tile over here if you want by rotating the board, which creates an interesting kind of mechanic because it changes up the layout of the board and changes how the board is played. Not only that, there's going to be various amounts of weapons laid all across the board that give their adventurers extra powers, such as a bow and arrow, or such as a telescoping spear. Things allow them to attack further away, things allow them to take extra hits, because the really, really interesting thing about the game, the thing that strikes me as one of the most entertaining parts of the game, is the fact of how combat works in this game. Now, every one of the heroes has a certain strength value, and on top of that strength value, every single player is going to place a card face down that's going to give them a bonus to their combat value. Here's the trick. Every one of these cards, except one of them, can only be used one time. So it becomes a bluffing game and becomes a mind game between both the players. So you not only have these minor semi-chess or checker style mechanics, whatever you prefer, but now you have this mind game going on. If I take this very weak hero and I attack your very, very strong hero, am I bluffing? Am I attacking you with a 6 strength, guaranteeing I can take out your hero and defeat him? Or am I bluffing, only attacking you with a 1, forcing you to use your higher strength card because you want to protect him? Or am I going somewhere in between? Or am I just trying to play your mind and do the double twist that we saw? Well, I'm not going to make any references to any movies because I don't want to be sued here. But you know, there's a certain movie about a princess and maybe a bride and a little duel about some poison or something or other, where the total mind game, and that's the mind game of Dungeon Twister Prison. This is a game that I enjoy very much. I've been playing it for a long time, and unfortunately, this game is a little bit harder to get these days. There is a really cool way to play the game all the way up to 4 players, but it doesn't require you, at least nowadays, to buy 2 copies of the base game, spray and paint one team so you can have a 3rd or 4th color, but it still does allow you to play this game all the way up to 4 players, and it's a really interesting modern way to play a chess-style game, and it's a game I absolutely enjoy because it's not random. There's no random mechanics of the game. It's a perfect knowledge style kind of game, and it's a battle of wits and a battle of deception and a battle of the minds between the players. Dungeon Twister Prison, number 16. Number 15 on the list is Terra Mystica, or what I like to refer to as chess for the 21st century, because this is a game that people are playing like a modern version of chess, because this game has become extremely popular and is a very, very thinky style kind of game. Because in Terra Mystica, every one of the players is representing one of the 14 races. And in this game, we are trying to terraform the planet to whatever kind of landmass that we prefer. Whether you happen to be the yellow player who likes the deserts, or you happen to be the red player who likes the mountains. And again, all these boards are double-sided, so the red player can either play as the giants or the chaos magicians, and it's more than just a cosmetic name change, because all of these races play very, very differently. And like I said, it's a pretty simple game to explain. Basically, you want to terraform the planet to whatever landmass that your people prefer, and you're going to score victory points by doing this. And the person who has the most victory points at the end of the game is going to win. But the game has a lot of very interesting mechanics. Not only the fact that this is an extremely asymmetric game, which is not a very common in a lot of the Euro games, and believe me when I say this is a very Euro game, but it has some very asymmetric abilities. Because as I said, none of these races play the same. None of them. They're not copies of each other. You can't say, well, this race is kind of like the other. No, they all play very, very differently. And again, this is a very much a chess style game, because every time you play the game, you must look at the board, look at the way the other players are playing, look at the way all these bonus tiles are coming out, look at how the entire game is coming out, look at the races your other players are playing, and in the player order they're playing their game, because you must know all of these things in an effort to be a good or even a great Terra Mystica player. So it's a very interesting game that has multiple different ways to play, multiple different ways to score, and again, you must rely on the strengths of your race, capitalize on the weaknesses of your enemies in an effort to score the most victory points. Now, the game is extremely enjoyable. It does play a little bit on the longer side, looking about an hour and a half for a good 4 to 5 player game. And I do have to say, this is one of those games that even though you can play with the lower player counts, the game is not as enjoyable. Now, I know a lot of people are going to start throwing things at their monitors right now, getting ready to type furiously that they enjoy Terra Mystica as a 2 or 3 player game. But I will stand by with my assertion here that this is definitely a game that plays best as a 4-player game. Seems like that's how it was designed, and it's very fantastic that way because this is a game where players are fighting over landmass. But at the same time, you must rely on the other players because their proximity is going to give you power. Power is used to use these extra special abilities to help you gain more victory points. With a lower player count, that becomes a little more difficult. And again, the game is still playable at those lower player counts, but I think it's an absolutely fantastic 4-player game. I really enjoy it at 5. You can probably convince me to play it at 3, but really it's at its best as a 4-player game. Terra Mystica, number 15 on my list. Number 14 on the list is Exodus Proxima Centauri, a absolutely fantastic space empire building game. Quick little spoiler here. Twilight Imperium 3 is not on my list anywhere. Not because Twilight Imperium 3 is bad, but because Exodus is so much better. See, this is a good 4X game that has all the 4Xs in it. Now, while it doesn't have the perfect amount of 4Xs in it, maybe that's a spoiler. There's another space game coming up here pretty soon that may hit it a little bit better, but it still deserves to be number 14 on my list. See, in Exodus Proxima Centauri, every one of the players plays an evolved version of the human race. Now, I say evolved version of the human race because they all play a little bit differently, especially with the expansion that makes the game even more asymmetric because every one of these races, we're all humans, have evolved a little bit differently. We're all going to play differently, and they all came with their own tech trees. And this is where I need to mention that every single player has a tech board that's bigger than this. It's about this big, plus your specialized tech board for your race. And you're going to develop your tech board, develop your civilization to try to win the game. Now, the reason why I like Exodus so much better than games such as Twilight Imperium 3 and games such as Eclipse is because it has the perfect amount of balance of the 4 X's: explore, exploit, expand, and exterminate. It has all 4 of the X's in it, but it has it in a fair amount without making it an 8-hour game. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoy Twilight Imperium 3. I think it's a lot of fun. You get into the character of the game, you enjoy the space opera of the game, but let's be serious here. We don't always have time for 8-hour games. So that's why Twilight Imperium 3 probably hits my table maybe twice a year if I'm lucky, but usually it's about once a year. While Exodus can hit my table once a month, and we have a heck of a lot of fun because it's the perfect balance of all those 4 X's. Why do I like it better than Eclipse? Well, I like it better than Eclipse because Eclipse does a little bit less of the X's that I really like and really think it needs to be in a civilization building game, while Exodus does a perfect blend of all 4 of those X's. Now, if you want to see my full review of it, I actually go over the comparisons between Exodus and those other space games, so I'm not going to rehash that over here. I'm just going to tell you this is an absolutely fantastic game, fantastic amount of replay, plays up to 6 players. It's a space empire 4X game with a tech tree, lots of asymmetry, different ways to play the game, and lots of replay. Exodus Proxima Centauri, a space empire building civilization game for up to 6 players, number 14 on my list. Number 13 on the list is Vinhos, especially the 2016 version of the game. See, Vinhos is a game that's designed back in 2010 by Vital Lacerda, and the idea of the game is every one of the players was trying to create a wine empire, and you did that by controlling your estate, and I'll show you the 2010 version of the game, but you did that by controlling your estate, and you use your estate to go ahead and invest in your winery by adding extra wineries to your estate, getting the ability to produce better wines. You can use these wines to sell them, do markets and trading and everything like that to create the most efficient wine empire and then go ahead and win the game. Well, the 2010 version of the game was a fantastic game. It's a game I enjoy quite a bit. But then Vital Lacerda went and redesigned the game and modernized it a little bit. And I don't think modernize is the perfect word for it, but you understand what I mean in just a second by that. But he brought it back out as the 2016 edition of the game. And what he did with the 2016 version of the game is he took the game and he streamlined it a little bit and made it a little bit more modern. See, board games are always enjoyable. We enjoy board games. We're board gamers. We enjoy the hobby. We have a lot of fun with it. But as I've kind of sprinkled throughout this video series, I've mentioned many times so far, is that there is a reward versus enjoyment factor with a lot of these board games. You can have a board game, it can be really fantastic, but if it takes you 8 hours to play the game, it's not going to hit the table. What's the point of board games? The point of the board game is to get the board game on the table, have fun with your friends, and have lots of enjoyment. So he took the game, streamlined it a little bit, but still kept the core mechanics and still kept the fantastic amount of fun and enjoyment that is Vinhos with the 2016 edition of the game. Still in the 2016 edition of the game, the players are wine connoisseurs, owners of wineries, and you're using your winery, your complete wine estate, again, still trying to build up your estates with wineries, and you have your workers that go out there, and you're going to have all these different things that allow you to improve your wine empire, but your goal is to produce wines and then sell these wines at the fair, where the magnates are going to judge who has the best wine. And you can use these wines to sell them abroad, to pull in more revenue, to pull in more victory points, and you can use that revenue to get access to more wineries from these different areas. That's going to give you, again, more victory points, help you build up your engine and create this very wonderful wine building game. Now, Vinhos has a really good theme. I enjoy the theme quite a bit, but it marries the mechanics and the theme together so well, and it's something that Vital Lacerda has to be given a high five for, because the gentleman does a fantastic job marrying mechanics and marrying with theme. Now, I don't want to go on a tirade here, because this is a top 51 games and not a board game review, but Vital has a very good track record for taking a theme and marrying mechanics to the game in a way that makes all the mechanics fit, but you're still playing a very well designed game. Vinhos is absolutely no exception to the rule. Vinhos is on this list. Viticulture is not on my list because I think this game is so well designed. There are multiple paths to victory. There's multiple ways to play the game. That you have the 2016, and if you really want to go for the more brutal game, there's a 2010 version of the game. And I'm going to tell you, it is a much more brutal, much more unforgiving game, but don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it's bad. It's a fantastic game, but the thing is, I can get the 2016 version of the game to my table a lot more than I get the 2010 version. If I had the choice, and if I was retired and all my friends were retired, we'd all sit back, drink wine, and play the 2010. But the reality is we can't do that. We can only get together once a week, so we enjoy the 2016 version of the game. This is an absolutely brilliantly designed game. Vital did a brilliant job marrying the mechanics with the theme, and Vinhos deserves to be number 13 on my list of top 51 board games of all time. Number 12 on the list is Dungeon Lords, especially Anniversary Edition. Wooden box, very nice components. Looks really cool. Anyways, Dungeon Lords, and I think you probably heard me say this a few times, but when I was younger, I got my start in gaming with PC games. I played a lot of Civilization games, but I also played a game that you probably heard of called Dungeon Keeper. Now, the idea of the PC game of Dungeon Keeper is you got to play the bad guy. You were the Dungeon Lord creating the dungeon, and then eventually the goody two-shoe heroes were going to come down and attack your dungeon, and they're going to try to destroy your wonderful hard work because, well, let's just be honest, as a Dungeon Lord, you were misunderstood because you were hiring unemployed creatures who needed jobs and helping them supply your dungeon. Ignore the fact that they're vampires. You know, they have a bad reputation. It's bad PR, bad press. Vampires are nice people. Go look at all the movies. I'll tell you, they're wonderful, wonderful people. They even sparkle. What Dungeon Lords did is it took the fun and the mechanics of Dungeon Keeper, the classic PC game, and moved it to a board game. And this is something that this designer is absolutely fantastic at doing. This is one game designer, and he has another game on my list, Mage Knight. He also has a couple different games on my list. But this is one designer who is absolutely brilliant at creating very deep, very rich games, much like Vital, who was number 13 on my list with Vinhos. He has done a fantastic job of marrying mechanics with a theme that all blend so well to create a deep, rich game that's absolutely enjoyable to play. Seeing this game, much like the PC game, it is spiritually based on the players are trying to create a dungeon. And how do we create the dungeon? Well, we use different various spots because we have one full year to build this dungeon, because at the end of the year, the horrible, evil adventurers are going to attack our dungeon that we worked so hard to work on. Horrible adventures. You guys should get lost. Anyways, we need to build up our dungeon over the year before these adventures come and ruin our fun. We do that by digging corridors. We do that by adding different rooms. We add that by having our imps go out there do our work for us. Maybe get wonderful trolls. Trolls are fantastic workers. Just ask anybody. They're also very good at working with imps in a very strange, magical way to produce more imps. Don't ask how. But we're going to do that over the air to try to create this perfect dungeon before the goody two-shoes come and ruin our fun. This is going to happen for 2 years. At the end of the second year, whoever has the dungeon that is the least ruined and has the most of your hard work survive the interfering, meddling, interloping heroes is going to be the winner of the game. Now, the interesting thing about dungeon lore is it actually tells you when you're learning how to play the game, if you manage to score 1 victory point by the end of the game, give yourself a high five, you've done a good job. This is a brutal game. It's very, very difficult. And if you actually look at the score chart, you see the score chart goes all the way down to -15. That's how brutal the game can be, but this is an absolutely enjoyable game. It's a fantastic game. It was a game I was very happy to get the anniversary edition of because this is such a thematic marrying of mechanics. Very enjoyable game. Plays up to 4 games, and it definitely deserves to be number 12 on my top 51 board games of all time. Number 11 on the list is Seasons, a game that really shocked me how high I managed to go up on this list. Now, the interesting thing is when I was making this list, I went over this list many times. Matter of fact, up to yesterday, I was still juggling the top 10 games, just to give you an idea of how much I was trying to make sure this was the perfect list and absolutely represent how these games play and how they place on my list. So Seasons is a dice game. Now, if you would say a dice game would be this high on my list, I would probably tell you are absolutely crazy. But Seasons, for some reasons, manages to do that. And I think it's because it's 2 games built into one. While it looks like a dice game on the cover, and you may think, oh, it's a dice game, might be a little bit of fun, it's really not a dice game. Because the only thing the dice do is they give you these resources. Now, these resources are going to be used to do the mass amount of victory point gaining of this game. Because you're going to use these resources to put these cards into play. Here's the trick of the game. Every single player only starts with 9 of these cards, and these are only about a third of the cards, especially if you have some of the expansions. There are a lot of cards in the game, and they all do various different things. They have different ways to score, and this is not one of those multiplayer solitaire games. This actually has cards in the game that allow you to screw over the other players quite well, so it's something you have to be very careful of because the game can be brutal in that aspect. But anyways, like I said, every single player starts the game with only 9 cards. You're going to play over 3 years. Every single year, you only get 3 of those cards. So the cards you pick every single round are absolutely imperative that you're picking cards that are going to help you score the victory points, create the combos, while you're fighting the dice to get the resources, while you're trying to get the most victory points, because there's a couple other things that hamstring your progress in the game. See, you can only bring out as many cards when you play the game based on your spell level. So you must raise your spell level by using these dice. The problem is these dice don't always raise your spell level, but you need resources. But you need to sell these resources. But you need to raise your spell level. But you need victory points. But you need resources. But I need to get my cards into play. Because if I don't get all my cards into play by the end of the game, I'm going to lose victory points. So now you see what is so brilliant about the design of the game. It's a very tight, well-designed game where all the various aspects of the game are woven together so well to create this brilliantly designed game that is, oh, a dice game. Not a dice game. It's a card game. It's a set-making game. It's a game where you're getting all these cards, creating these interesting combos, trying to hedge your bets, play brilliantly, watch how the other players are playing, while you're still able to interact with the other players and influence their decisions, because you can kind of attack the other players with these cards to create the game of Seasons, number 11 on my list of top 51 board games of all time. I hope you enjoyed number 20 to number 11 of my top 51 board games of all time. Stay tuned for numbers 10 to number 1. And of course, when I'm done, I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up in a separate video, kind of going over my top 51 games. And I'm also going to show my boys, both of my sons, their top 10 board games of all time. I'm going to do a quick run through on those also. It's kind of interesting to parallel their favorite board games with my favorite board games and see where we intersect, and also see where we definitely don't intersect at all. So I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video series and you want to help support the channel, think about tossing $1 in the tip jar by heading over to Patreon. That will be patreon.com/OTSBGR. Your little dollar donation can help bring out more content, keep bringing out more content, because don't forget, this channel is 100% self-funded by myself. I do not have any sponsors, which is nice because that means I don't have to answer anybody, but it also means that everything that you see here, I have to pay for out of my own pocket. So tossing $1 over in the tip jar is greatly, greatly appreciated. If you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.